Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. What a wonderful turnout and a really exciting evening for our first event in 2023 for Melbourne Jewish Book Week, as in first live event. We have had another event, Care of Jewish Quarterly, who we have a partnership with that's on Zoom. I think it's going to be uploaded very shortly if you didn't see that live. My name is Debbie Lee. As of December last year, I became the Festival Director of Melbourne Jewish Book Week, which is such a privilege. So I'm newly minted, but I have been in the publishing game for over 30 years across all facets of publishing. Before I go on, I do want to pay my respects and acknowledge that we're on the land of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and it is their land, their unceded land, on which Melbourne Jewish Book Week exists. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders whose culture and stories span 60,000 years. I'd also like to acknowledge that we gather here today in the very newly refurbished Melbourne Holocaust Museum. It's absolutely beautiful and it's a real privilege to be here. It was originally opened in 1984 with the mission to educate the public, to combat anti-Semitism, racism and prejudice in the community. The design is full of light and life so that we may keep memories alive of the 6 million who died and all those who survived. And of course, the reason we are here tonight is to celebrate the writing of Shalom Auslander, who hails from New York and who has indeed kept up to his name and landed in Oz, and we are very, very privileged to have you in our presence. As many of you know, Shalom is the acclaimed author of numerous books, perhaps the best known of which is Foreskin's Lament. Other titles include Beware of God, Hope a Tragedy, and most recently, Mother for Dinner. As his various titles suggest, and that's just a smattering of all his writing, as his titles suggest, he is a master of satire with a strong Jewish twist. He's even created a TV show called Happy-ish. And I'm delighted to say that some of his books are available tonight. Chris Redfern of the Avenue Bookstore will be out in the foyer, and Shalom will be signing books later on. And of course, Chris is the owner of the Avenue Bookstore, and that is an institution in itself in Elstonwick. So we're very happy to have Chris available to sell the books. And we're also here tonight with David Sluky, of course, who is here to interview Shalom. And David has a very long title, so I'll have to read that. He's the Lottie Smorgon Associate Professor in Contemporary Jewish Life and Culture, and has recently been appointed the Director of the Australian Centre for Jewish Civilisation at Monash University. David writes about the Holocaust, socialism and comedy, not necessarily all at once. I'm sure we can expect a highly entertaining and thought-provoking, perhaps even confronting conversation. We will aim to allow 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. And right now, I'm delighted to hand over to David and Shalom. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone. I also just want to acknowledge that we're on the unceded land of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and to pay respect to elders past and present. So welcome, Shalom. I should warn everyone that I'm guessing there's going to be a few F-bombs tonight, so from
them?
Could be. I don't want to preempt anything. So basically, we'll have a conversation tonight, be laid back, and then some Q&A. And I think a good starting point is to tell us a bit about your background. Your sort of breakout book is this memoir, Foreskin's Lament, about sort of your own sort of coming of age, if you will. Right. Tell us a little about that and sort of how that informed your life as a writer.
So I was raised in the 15th century.
You look tremendous.
In a very orthodox world, in a very dysfunctional family, in a very dysfunctional town. So what a fucking surprise, I'm a writer. But it was very, it was Old Testament, you know, God's a bit of an asshole. He's ruthless. He's a war god. You get one strike and you're out. And it was oppressive, to say the least. And over time, I started to. It wasn't really a question of sort of going one day, oh, I see the light and I need to leave. It was just so much depression and misery that it was either that or swan dive off the top of a building, which I considered. Actually, I considered it yesterday when I started getting all these emails. So
Just a few more days to go.
Yeah. And so that's kind of the background. I mean, I now have 2 sons. We're a very happy family. They don't know anything about God or why anyone would like a person of that character. They don't understand the shame that I was raised with. It's a completely foreign concept to them. They understand guilt. They understand embarrassment. I've recently finished a follow-up to Foreskin's Lament that's called Fe, which is about the life of self-criticism and the world we find ourselves in after thousands of years of this very destructive story.
So I have 5 follow-up questions, but I'll start with one, and that is, firstly, how did you end up off that path? I imagine it's like quite common that people find that world oppressive but can't get out of it. But you got out of it.
Honestly, it was just a very long, painful. There was no alternative, so it wasn't a question of being heroic and seeing the light. It was just, I can't do this anymore, and that was sort of the end of it. I don't necessarily feel that I've left it. I still argue with God occasionally, but He started it. So I haven't, like, you don't leave it, but I left. It's been up and down. I as a teenager, I had my teenage rebellious phase, and then I got arrested, and in order to get out of doing community service, I went to Israel and rediscovered God in a very extreme way, walking around Mea Sharim with a hat and tzitzis out, and then a year and a half later, looking at myself, I'd gone to I don't know if you know Mea Sharim, but it's like, the belly of the beast. And
Rip and Lee, for those who...
Actually, I got married in Israel, and we went back because my wife's family lives there, and but they're very Tel Aviv. So she's like never even been to Jerusalem. She went as a kid. And she's like, "Why do you hate it here so much?" I'm like, "Come, let's go look." And I was like, "Oh, I'll show you Mea Sharim. I'll show you the hood where I hung out." And we went there, and there's all these rules about what you have to wear, and what you don't fuck around with those guys, and you have to wear a long dress. And so she played all the rules. She was totally kosher. And we get there, and this little old man, must have been like 75 years old, a long gray beard and a strimel. He's like shuffling down the sidewalk of the main street in Mea Sharim, and you see him coming. It's like God walking toward us, and I'm like, "Come!" We step off the sidewalk to allow him to pass, and he goes, and he looks up, and he looks at me, and he looks at her, and he spits at her. And I did not handle that well. I said something to the effect of, "Fuck you, asshole." And suddenly there's like 30 students coming at us, and we're like, run. Baruch Hashem. So, but I got very religious there, and then one day just saw myself in the window of this. I went to get my hat blocked, and it's not a joke. They don't look that sharp by themselves. It's a Borsalino. It's an expensive hat. I actually I paid for it by tending bar. It's a complicated story. And I just looked at myself, like I got the hat and I walked outside and I'm like, what in God's name are you doing? And I was on a plane that night and left. And so it's this wild swings because it's all guilt. And actually that night, so I called a friend of mine who's in Queens, and I said, I need a place to crash. I can't go home. This is like just a good example of the struggle that goes on. So I got there, I dropped my bag off, I asked him if I can borrow his car at about 10 o'clock at night. I drive into the city, go to Hell's Kitchen, pick up a prostitute. She finishes. And this is my opening speech at Adelaide, by the way.
It's the start of your eulogy too, right?
It's my big opening. She gets out of the car, and I'm so filled with guilt, and I look down, and she's been sitting on my hat. And which sounds funny, but I was like, I'm in deep shit. And I drove away. I pulled over around the corner, opened the door, vomited, just out of terror, drove back to Queens, found an all-night yeshiva, and just stayed there praying all night for forgiveness. And then I had a cheeseburger in the morning for breakfast. So it's this never-ending kind of, I don't know what, it's just an endless, you know. There are those who say, well, you know, you're 50, come on. There's no God, get over it. But it's theological abuse, right? Which you would never say to a victim of sexual abuse, right? Because you understand that when that happens at a young age, that part of you is destroyed forever. That's the crime, right? It's soul murder, right? And you can do that to a person sexually, you can do it to them theologically. So it's not the same thing as just saying, well, I know Santa could never pull that off in one night. It's not that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure there isn't a God, but I can't quite extract myself from that.
Would you describe it as trauma?
At least.
Okay.
Yeah. And we all go through that. We all have our traumas. But for me, writing is a way of trying to figure it out, or at worst laugh at it. Like that was the revelation with writing and books was that I could take this me and look at it from a bit of a distance and turn it around and go, oh, I never noticed that before. That's kind of funny. And one of the first things I ever wrote was a line that ended up being in Foreskin's Lament, which is, I believe in God. It's been a real problem for me. And it has been, and it continues to be. So not in a orthodox, you know, I shouldn't eat this thing. Although, of course, today I have one day in Melbourne. I go and I get sushi, and I'm sick to my stomach because it's strafe and God's fucking with me. So,
sorry to the people in the first row.
Yeah. So I did the very Jewish thing of traveling and spent my whole time here at a pharmacy. Yeah.
You talked about your sons and how they sort of don't feel shame, like they distinguish, you know, they understand embarrassment and guilt, but shame is something you've worked very hard to shield them from.
Yeah.
one of the themes that runs very strongly through your works is about parental responsibility and the relationships between parents and children. Can you tell us a little more about, the role your childhood plays and how that's shaped your fathering, your fatherhood?
Right. Well, God is a terrible father. He's about the worst father you can imagine. He loses his mind. He may have a drinking problem, I'm not sure. He flies off the handle. And what was particularly difficult was that I learned that about this perhaps fake character, but it was told to me by people who very much believed it, and my father in heaven was a lot like my father in the kitchen. They were both angry. They were both violent. So I never had a father. When my wife was pregnant with our first son, I'll never forget, I went to my shrink and I just said, "What does a father do? I have no idea. I don't even know what to do. Where do I go? What do I do?" And he said to me, "It's very simple. It's not easy, but it's simple." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Unconditional love." And I said, "I'm not familiar with that concept." And that's what it's been, right? So it's trying to and the more time I spend as a father, the less I can comprehend the idea of God as a father, or my father as a father. It's incomprehensible to me, because they're just born so perfect. They're just so there's no damage, there's no flaws. Just stay out of the fucking way. Stop telling them shit. Stop telling them they're bad, right? So, the first story I was ever told was the story of Feh. And the story of Feh is God made some great things and said it's really good when he was done with it. And then he made man. And he doesn't say that. And he makes man out of dirt. He makes him out of mud. He even calls him dirt. That's his name, dirt. And then he scraps the whole project because dirt isn't great, and he comes up with women. And that's a little better, but, they steal apples, they get thrown out. The first son born of a human on earth murders his brother, and it only gets worse from there. I will not contend with mankind forever. That's what God said on like our first birthday. That was chapter 1. And so it's the story of you suck. And it's a story, if you look at, recent literature about it, or neuroscience, we're a creature. There's a literary scholar named Jonathan Gottschall who refers to us as the storytelling animal. That's what makes us different. Our entire operating system is story. We remember by story. We organize communities by story. We grow by story. We educate by story. And it seems to me that we're the subjects of some sick experiment where somebody said, let's take this creature that lives by story, and for thousands of years, we're going to tell it a story where it's the antagonist, where it's the bad one. I wonder what kind of world that might result in. Perhaps there'd be holocausts. Perhaps there'd be bombs that could blow us up. Perhaps there'd be hatred everywhere. Why? This is a horrible, horrible story. I always compare it to no one would have gone to see Jaws if Jaws was right. No one said, yeah, you're right, you should have eaten those swimmers. They're in your water. But in the Old Testament, Jaws is God and Jaws is right. And we sit there, it's like pigs teaching their own kids to be little pigs, but saying the wolf was right. That's why you should never build houses in the woods. So it's a fucked up thing, and you don't get over it. So for my kids, I've never told them that story. That's just not the story they've heard. And that's not to say they don't feel bad or, have of course, they're humans. But they don't understand the idea that you are inherently, every fiber of your being, bad. They just don't understand it. My my sons joke with me. My 13, I have an 18-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I'm writing Fat, and he's asking me what it's about, and I tell him it's about shame. I was raised with a lot of shame. And he said, "What do you mean? Like when you break something or you eat something?" And I said, "Well, that, but not only that. It's just being told that you're bad, essentially bad." And he's just, why would anyone do that? Why would anyone tell you that? And so what's kind of awesome now is that it's a running joke in our house. If I drop a fork, he'll go, "For shame," and we just laugh at it. So that's a victory, right? It's a win. I was close friends with Philip Seymour Hoffman, and he had similar issues from an Irish Catholic background, but it's the same story. Anytime I do readings or events that don't have the word Jewish in the name, fallen Muslims will come over, fallen Catholics. They've all been told the same thing. They all feel like shit, constantly feel like shit. And when I talk to my son, my oldest son is a musician, he doesn't like how he's playing, or something. I'm like, and he's hard on himself. I'm like, the problem with that is that, first of all, it's not constructive, but when you're hard on yourself, you're going to be hard on other people. And it starts this cycle of judging. That's why I don't have I can't go online. I've never been on Twitter. I don't know what the fuck that is. I don't go on Instagram. From day one, when Amazon came out and my publisher was like, "This is a toilet. Do not go on there. It's just people giving shit to other people." And that's all it is. And that's become who we are. We're the species that, raised on a horrible story, sits in judgment of each other endlessly. And it's poison. It's toxic. So all of us have been abused by this story. There are better stories. Cinderella's a better story.
It's also dark, though, no?
It is, but her parents died. It's a happy beginning.
This is going to seem like a really silly question, and I suspect I know the answer based on the books, but are you an optimist?
The same shrink who told me how to be a father said, "I'm worried about you. I think you have a nasty streak of optimism." And I think that's part of this whole thing is trying to find something positive, because everything was negative, right? So I don't keep anything anymore. We have some anti-traditions that are really, really lovely. So on Yom Kippur, this started years and years ago, before we had kids. I'd get really, I didn't do anything, but I was 23, 24, and that day comes, and no matter what, I am on edge. I'm an asshole because someone's judging me. Life and death it's court, and it's a hanging judge. And I get a little crazy. So we started this thing, and we just go on long hikes in the woods. We lived in the woods at the time. And then we'd go for a long hike in the morning and then come back and then have a massive barbecue. We just eat like crazy. And that became a yearly tradition. We go on hikes and we have a feast. And what's funny is that my kids now are like, "Hey, it's Yom Kippur." They can't wait. They think it's, "Oh, who's coming over? Are we having shrimp?"
It reminds me of 100 years ago, socialists in New York would have balls.
Right.
They'd have these masquerade balls on Yom Kippur, and that was their anti-tradition.
Right. Well,
but it was a way of marking it as well.
Sure. The other part of that story is that the religious would come and raid them.
Yeah.
As they are wont to do. But my kids look forward to it because we always do a hike and we always have a good meal. But they also know that Dad's going to be a little off today. They just know that that's something happening.
Oh, you lost it off your ear, but it's working okay.
I see you say one thing about Yom Kippur and God shuts you down. Guy doesn't fuck around. So but they know that I'm going to be a little weird. And for them, it literally is a little weird. They've never heard me yell. They've never seen my wife and I fight. We're just not, we're ungodly in that way. So, so it takes a long time to get over, but they look at it and they go, oh, weirdly, they have a better connection to Judaism than I do. Because Hanukkah is 8 days of Christmas, and Passover, like, we just have a huge party with all our friends, and Yom Kippur is a hike and a meal. So they're like, they're coming at it from such a different perspective. It's why I kind of always feel like we shouldn't be teaching religion to anybody under 18. You know, because we can't process it. We don't understand it. I remember reading Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great, and I always loved Hitchens. And then I read this book, and chapter 1 is, well, when I was 6, I knew the nuns were full of it. And I said, oh, go fuck yourself. No, you didn't. You're as damaged as the rest of us. You shouldn't, if you can't read Zohar till you're 40, you shouldn't be reading Old Testament till you're 80. It's just not a good story for kids.
Do you protect your kids from that trauma that you experience? I mean, obviously you don't father like your father did, and you don't parent like your mother, but do they know? Do they know what's buried inside of you, like what comes through in these pages? Because the optimism and the way you talk about your sons, it's like another voice to what we hear in the books.
They don't read me.
Right.
They wisely do not read me.
But do they know?
They read J.K. Rowling. They do know. Yeah, of course they know. Because they, why don't we have grandparents? How come we've never seen anybody? Right. I haven't seen my family in 30 years. So but they know, and they're very well aware of the story and the struggle. I don't think they totally understand how complicated it is, or how it's an everyday struggle. And every day it is. There are instincts that I got from Dad, both in Muncie and in heaven, that I have to fight against. But what's interesting is the less I'm like God, the better of a father I am. So one of the first things I noticed right away was be wrong, even if you think you're right. Like it's good for them to hear that, to see that you can be wrong. There isn't this fascist kind of dictator who's infallible.
Or as my father used to say to me, do you want to be right or do you want to be married?
Right.
Sorry, Mish.
Yeah. Right. And my father had a version of that, which was just, you're wrong. So, that's the process, I remember hearing Vonnegut's daughter, who said she never read his books growing up. Well, all they knew was that Dad's in the little shed, pecking away, smoke billowing out when he comes out, telling them to shut up, he's trying to work. And then I think it was after his death or something that she read his book and was like, I had no idea I was living with this guy. It was just Dad. I had no idea. I knew he went through the war. I knew all, but I didn't know it was that. And that's, if I didn't have my wife and kids, I don't know if I'd bother. I mean, with existence, generally speaking, it's a bit of a headache. But the writing is, I figured out very early on that on days where I write, I'm not an asshole. And my wife has this constant refrain where, I write from 8. I take my youngest son to school. I write from 8 in the morning till 4 at night when I pick him up, and by 1 o'clock nothing's come out and I'm in a bad mood, and she'll just say, just write one funny sentence. That's it. When you do that one thing, you're a different person. And I'll just be like, oh yeah, right, okay, right. And so I get it tattooed on my arm so I remember. But that's the religion for me.
How do you know when that sentence is funny?
Because I'm sitting in a coffee shop and I laugh like a lunatic and people move away. And I live in LA with homeless people and I'm the crazy one. Yeah, it's just, it's funny. I was talking with Howard Jacobson about it the other day at London Jewish Book Week, and it's the same thing. That's what he strives for, that moment. And whether anybody else laughs at it or not, doesn't really matter. Be nice if they did, but for me, it's getting through the day. It's not, it's not a job.
So, like, are you your imagined audience then when you're writing?
No, I just think, oh, those are funny words.
Right.
So when I wrote, when I wrote a scene in Hope, a Tragedy is a novel about a guy who is Jewish and has a very overbearing mother. It's nonfiction. And he tries to get rid of her. He's trying to get rid of her and get rid of the past. And in his attempt, he buys a house in upstate New York, a barn that he wants to just live at and raise his kid at. And he hears a noise in the attic, and he goes up and he finds Anne Frank. And she's 82, and she's working on her second book. And she's a huge pain in the ass. And I'll get back to that in a minute. Just unload the gun for a minute. But I remember when he finds her, I was like, I have to write the scene where he finds her first, because that's the hard one. And that's how I'll know who she is. So I write this scene, and he walks upstairs, and he finds her, and he says, get out of my house. Who are you? She said, I'm Anne Frank. He's like, great, I'm Goebbels. Get the fuck out. What are you doing in my house? What are you doing in my house? And she won't leave. And she's sitting there with a typewriter and a stack of papers. And she's like, you're interrupting me. I'm trying to write. I need matzah. And he's like, I'm not getting you matzah. I don't know who you are. Get out. And he lectures her. And he says, okay, I'm calling the police. And by the way, this isn't funny. This is not a joke. This is an insult to the millions of people who died. And she rolls up her sleeve, and she shows him her numbers and says, and the line was, blow me, said Anne Frank. And that was a point where I was like, okay, now I get this. This is funny. And I grew up watching Holocaust movies. By the time I was 6 years old, they brought us in on Holocaust Memorial Day. It was a massive screen, 10 times the size of this, and they just showed us dead bodies and said, you're next. And now recess. Who wants to be it? Because you're all it. And so it's a little bit like the God thing, where so I grew up hating her. I didn't want to ever see her again. She was just a reminder that that I'm a victim, that we suffer, always. And when I got older, I started to go, well, I'm going to go actually read about her a little bit. And what you find when you read the diary is this kid is badass. She is no victim. She was cool. If she grew up, she would be writing shit that no one here would buy. I guarantee you.
Funny too.
She's
they found
funny.
jokes that
she
were...
hated the religious kids. She was an adolescent girl going through the throes of puberty. Her mother pissed her off. This was a tough chick in the coolest possible way. She seemed to me like when I was a kid and I was really into Joan Jett. I don't know if you remember her. Like a metal rocker chick. I was like, wow, this is not who I was told was this person. And I had to come to relearn it in a way. And so writing that book is like me writing any other book, where it's a form of relearning, of taking the garbage version and going, well, maybe there's a better version. Right? Maybe Adam and Eve didn't. Maybe God's the antagonist and we're the protagonist. Maybe Adam and Eve said, "Fuck you, we're leaving." If that's the way you react to an apple, I don't want to be here when you catch us with salad. So maybe it's just, he's the bad guy. We're going to leave. We're going to start somewhere new. That's a great story. Right? There are better stories if you rewrite it. So that's a lot of what I'm doing, and I think my kids understand that, and they understand that that's a never-ending process.
Let's talk a little more about Anne Frank and the Holocaust, and I think, given where we are, it's probably a topic we should broach. I mean, did you worry about writing, sort of bringing humour into that topic, or sort of, you know, Anne Frank is this iconic figure. Did you, like, were you worried about the reaction that you probably ended up eliciting by writing that story?
In the beginning, when I thought, I like this idea, but by the time I'm done with it, if you want to take offense at it, then you want to take offense at it. To me, anyone who can read and reads that book understands that she's a hero. And so I don't really care. To me, I'm angrier at the people who turned her into the Jewish Jesus, who just suffered. This little meek girl who got stuck in an attic and then got gas. And you're just like, shut the fuck up. That is such a disservice to her. That is so unfair. Let me tell you something. If there's heaven and she's up there, I don't want to be around when she meets the people who've been saying that to her. It's a little bit like Helen Keller, right? Helen Keller was a badass, right? But she's portrayed as the little blind deaf girl who was weak. Well, guess what? She fought through that. And when she grew up, she was writing socialist essays and pro-choice, and she was a radical, and no one wanted to hear from her. They didn't publish her. They didn't listen to her. They wanted the little deaf girl. Where's that little victim? So partially what bugs me about Jewish anything book weeks is it's always in a Holocaust museum. No, I mean, honestly, we're not poor people. We can find somewhere else. You know, there's not a restaurant we can go to. Is there a bar? There's a bar in my hotel. Let's just go there. Like, I don't get it. I was super pissed once. I was like, for one of the books, I got invited to a New York Jewish something festival at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. I'm like, awesome. I'll go. I'm expecting like a Lenny Bruce room. And here's an exhibit about the Ramones, because that's Jewish heritage. And I get there and it's a fucking Holocaust museum. And I'm like, guys, if this is Jewish heritage, why do you think people are leaving?
Right.
This isn't Jewish heritage. This is, first of all, it always makes me laugh because I have to find humor in something. So to me, in Holocaust museums, I'm always like, boy, the people who died in the Inquisition must be really pissed. Because for hundreds of years, that was the standard. Never again Inquisition. And all of a sudden, Hitler comes around. No one cares about the Inquisition people anymore. There's no Inquisition museum. It's kind of
Mel
funny.
Brooks gave a nice tribute.
Yeah, I mean, he got shit for it. But I'd love for there to be a Jewish heritage museum. That'd be really great. They just, they run Woody Allen films, and there's a whole thing on Marxism, and Groucho's there, and Zeppo, and the Stooges, and why wouldn't you have that? But it never is. It's stuck in suffering and shame. And that's not a good recipe for anything. And no one seems to mind. They just keep building more of them. I don't even know where you get all the stuff to put in these Holocaust museums. Aren't we running out of shit? Are we just making, what? It's crazy.
Yeah, Esther, you can field the letters tomorrow.
Yeah, but you know what? Show me the Jewish Heritage Museum when you're done writing the letter. Show me where there's something to be proud of. Not something to cry about or feel victimhood about or weep about. Because what I tell my kids about being Jewish is I hate the boxes. Mother for Dinner is
Your new
an
novel.
often brutal satire on cultural identity, which is why no one in the US reviewed it. One person did at the Wall Street Journal. And interestingly, he said, it's amazing this book was published in what turns out to be a sort of cultural samizdat in America. And then no one else touched it, so he was right. But it's about a cannibal American, because you can't write about anybody else without getting canceled, so I just figured, fuck it, I'll do cannibals, who's got issues with being cannibal. He doesn't like the label. And he wants to assimilate, and his mother is very against this. She
like
doesn't
Army
even,
Hammer, right?
Yeah, she doesn't even like cannibal American. She's a proud cannibal, and that comes from, like, I don't like everything is, oh, so it's a Jewish thing, it's a Jewish this, it's a Jewish that. As a kid, that's what drove me and my friends apart. I was friendly with lots of kids, and suddenly you hit adolescence, and you're not allowed to go play with the Schwarzes, and they're not going to go play with the Kikes, and Beanie Boys, and Walks, and all the Lenny Bruce names, and it's fucked up. So, what I tell when my sons ask me though, like, okay, well, what is it about being Jewish that's good? And I just like, look, first of all, you get to control the media, which is awesome.
Doesn't help me.
Yeah. If you have a screenplay, just let me know. I call Clooney, it's a done deal. But what I tell them is that what I press to answer, I would say that what I like about Jewish history is that we're shit stirrers. We cause trouble. We're the sand and the Vaseline, and it's great. We ask a lot of irritating questions. The Spanish were right to throw us out. If you want to maintain control, you don't need a group of people going around saying, what if?
Right.
Or being funny. There's a group in Brooklyn that I came into contact with after my first book was published it's called Footsteps. And it's an organization that helps kids from Hasidic communities who want to leave. And it's a beautiful foundation. Like, not because it's encouraging people to leave, they don't do that, but people who want to, who find themselves gay or just not believing or whatever, and they're stuck in Williamsburg. And it was started by this woman who was Lubavitch, and her parents were born agains. They weren't raised that way. They lived in Crown Heights. Her grandmother lived on the Upper West Side. And she ran away and moved in with her grandmother and had to learn how to speak English, had to get a high school equivalency, because the schools at yeshivas don't give you that. And basically had to rebuild her whole life. And so when her grandmother died, she left her all the money. And she took this money, got herself through college, and started this foundation. It's awesome. And they asked me to speak at one of their anniversaries. And what I told them was, you guys, there's some drinks or something beforehand. Everyone's happy, but you can feel this sense of guilt or judgment. And what I told them was like, what amazes me is that the father of our religion, of all the Abrahamic religions, is Abraham. And Abraham is defined, other than trying to murder his son, we'll just put that to the side.
We all have our problems, right?
Yeah, life's tough. But before that, he's defined as, and Abraham got up and left. Abraham split. Abraham looked around, said, I don't buy this Baal stuff. I don't buy this Babylonian stuff. I'm out of here. And we admire him for that. But if we do that, we're in cherem. We're in trouble. Or if you're a Muslim and do that, you're in deep shit. If you're a Christian and do that, you're out. But that's who he was. There's a great story, an old midrash, and it's kind of funny. So the idea is that Abraham's dad was an idol salesman. It's fucking hilarious. Hello, can I interest you in God? And he had a statue shop, Bed Bath and Baal. And
It really is like Mel Brooks' 2,000-year-old man.
yeah, it's
like
ridiculous.
a sketch, yeah.
And so he has to go away on business. There's a convention in Vegas. And he says, all right, Abraham's like 6 years old. He goes, you're in charge of the shop, right? So he leaves. And Abraham, having lots of doubts about all these gods, takes a hammer and smashes all of them. And he leaves Baal in the middle. And Baal was, Tony Soprano. He was the guy. And he puts the hammer in Baal's hand. And Dad comes home, looks around, and goes, what the fuck did you do? And he goes, I didn't do anything. It was Baal. And his father says, don't lie to me. It's just a statue. And he said, well, if you think it's just a statue and not God, then I shouldn't have to think it's God. And Abraham got up and left. It's a great story. And what I told all these footsteppers was, you're Abraham. You're asking questions. You're a shit stirrer. That to me is a tradition worth keeping alive, right? Is asking these questions. But we're not allowed to. Now the descendants of Abraham aren't allowed to ask the same question. I know the Talmud, I've studied it. We ask a lot of questions, but it's a fixed game, because anytime the answer comes something they don't like, they're like, yeah, let's just talk about that after the Messiah comes. So it's nothing's open for debate. There's just a lot of arguing. But that's a similar thing to Anne Frank. It's like, how did we take something that was inherently so good, so rebellious, so positive, and make it restrictive, make it suffocating, make it the chains, My mother wasn't telling me that eating cheeseburgers made me worse than Hitler. She was telling me that I was breaking the chain of thousands of years of tradition. Well, I'm done with chains. Abraham didn't like his chains either.
But, I think in a way you're also, you've just made this powerful statement about how you're clearly not breaking the and I don't mean the chains that bind you, but I mean in that Yiddish sense of the golden acclaimed, like this tradition that goes back, that you're a link in the chain, right? Like, you're not a breakaway, you're a continuation. So I'm reading your books and I'm thinking, okay, this story about the hat is like Shalom Aleichem on the page, right, on account of a hat, the mistaken identity with a hat. I'm reading passages that I'm like, well, Philip Roth is clearly influencing the way you're writing. I'm seeing Kafka, Lenny Bruce, Sophie Tucker. You clearly see yourself as a Jewish writer, despite the antagonism towards a certain brand of Judaism.
But I don't. It's also Gogol, and it's also Bulgakov, and it's also Donald Bartholomew, and it's not that. I've never read Roth. I read Henry Roth. I read one book of Philip Roth, Sabbath Theater, which ruined me for all the others. It was the only good one. It's pure id, and then he becomes literary and fucked it up. But I don't, I remember being told that early on, and I looked into it. Philip Roth grew up in Newark. He didn't wear a yarmulke. That's not my past. But that's what gets to me. It's like, oh, you have a Jewish sense of humor. Black humor is black humor. Lots of people have stood on the gallows and they joke about it. And it's not like that I don't want to be associated with it. It's that I genuinely, I'm fine, that's great. But I genuinely think this is ultimately a bad idea. I don't think this ends well for anybody, because there's also people saying, oh, he's got such an African-American sense of humor. The people who made me laugh the most, other than Kafka, were Irish. Irish writers are hilarious. I was convinced Beckett was Jewish, because they told me the only people who write funny were Jews. And it turned out Kafka was funny, and the letters of Groucho Marx are brilliant. So I figured Beckett was too. But Beckett and Joyce and Flann O'Brien and the Irish guys crack me up, because they have the same grim sort of thing. And whether it's Monty Python, who couldn't be less un-Jewish. Like, it doesn't help. I get pride, but pride so often leads to something negative.
But I'm thinking less about pride than about lineage, right? And sort of like what tradition you fit into as a writer. And, you know, I mean, Kafka is all over, you know, his fingerprints are all over your work. But I sort of see there's this tension you're trying to resolve, not to psychoanalyze you, but here we go, we're on the couch. This tension you're trying to resolve.
You're not the first.
Between like that like very strong kind of Jewish link that you clearly ambivalent about, and the universalism that sort of permeates almost everything you've said tonight. Like, how do you resolve that tension between this trying to like find something positive, optimistic in being Jewish, like what you described to your sons, and a kind of universalism, like between maintaining some kind of identity that is culturally distinctive?
Because there's always a but. We're shit stirrers, but so are other people. I just react negatively to it. And honestly, like, I loved Kafka, but I didn't connect my writing to him until a reviewer said so.
Right.
I just get up in the morning, everything feels shitty. I try and avoid looking at myself in the mirror, and I go to a cafe and I write, and I try and laugh, and then I put the books out there in the world, and if somebody says, oh, it's like this, then they can say it's like that. If they say, oh, you know, you come from a long tradition of people with curly hair. Okay, I don't care. You say, well, you're Jewish. Okay, whatever. It doesn't, that's after the fact.
Right.
I'm just trying to have a laugh and keep things, to your point, to just try and find a silver lining somewhere. And it's there. I feel like my whole life is about removing this shroud that I was wrapped in on day one, and trying to not, because it can't be. I guess I just feel it can't be. It can't be right. I know the stories. I know all of it. I've studied it. I was supposed to be the next Gadol Hador, my rabbis always said. I probably said that to everybody while they were molesting them, but that's what they said to me. But, you know, that's what you're supposed to be. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. It can't be. I just refuse to accept that. I just refuse to accept it. If it is and it's all shit, then fine. Then it's all shit. But I'm starting from that place. So I don't mind if I've wasted all this shit time just trying to find something to laugh at, something positive. And it's there. It's there. I look at my boys, I'm just like, that's possible.
I just want to, before we throw open to Q&A, I want to ask you one more question about humour, because you've talked a lot about humour, but I haven't grilled you enough on that. And just the role of humour, you know, you deal with such dark matter, whether it's your struggles with God. And I think about like this genre of off the derech memoirs, which is quite popular now. There's the Netflix series Unorthodox, and the other film, One of Us, thank you. You know, they're very au fait, and you're kind of the OG off the derech memoir, but your approach is so different to those. Like, Shalom Dean is very earnest in his memoir, and Deborah Feldman's very earnest. But, you know, you really had me, you know, this was not the first time I read it, and still laughing again and again. You know, why humour as the approach to dealing with all these really difficult things?
I don't know. Milan Kundera has a really great essay on Kafka, and he this is something I read not before I started writing, but where he says that what he does is he goes into the dark depths of the joke. So he starts with a joke, and then he goes, well, what if it's not a joke? What if it's serious? What if I play this straight? And I think, to me, that's what life is. It's a joke that we have to take seriously while we're here. but it's got to be a joke. We don't know where we were before. We don't know where we're going after. You know, Beckett, like we're here for an instant and then it's done. And it feels like, you know, another favorite writer of mine is Voltaire. I know he's an anti-Semite or whatever. But he had this great line that God is a stand-up comedian telling jokes to a room full of people who are too afraid to laugh. And that's just life to me. So the things that make me laugh are the darkest of the dark. They're just funny.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever read the book This Way for the Gas, ladies and gentlemen, right? So there's different ways of dealing with the same subject. That night wasn't for me, right? But I'll tell you a funny story about Elie Wiesel. That's my other opening for Adelaide. I've got a great Elie Wiesel story. Basically, someone I know is very friendly with him. And they used to go out all the time in New York City for dinner, to have a glass of wine and a meal. And Elie Wiesel loved to laugh. He laughed at the slightest thing. Dumbest joke in the world, Ellie's cracking up. And laughing so hard often that tears come out of his eyes. And more than one time, they're at a restaurant, they're having a laugh, they're joking. Wiesel's laughing so hard, tears are coming out of his eyes, and some stranger will just come over and say, I know, I'm so sorry. Because they can't imagine he would laugh.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's just the way through it. So for me, earnestness is poison. You know,
Please don't read my book.
there's one laugh in the Old Testament, and she gets hell for it. He did not like her laughing. So for me, it's a natural instinct to just go, well, then I'm going to laugh. If it pisses him off, I'm good.
Right. And if you don't laugh, you'll cry, right? And
Yeah, and it feels like it feels like a victory. You know, if God is the asshole he told me he is, and if I die and I get up there and he's like, oh, here you are. Well, guess what? Go to hell. I get to say, well, fuck you, I laughed. I win.
Right.
Whatever. All the funny people are down there anyway.
So I think maybe it's a good time to open for some Q&A. Oh, Deb has the mic. And I'm just going to let you pass it around because I can't actually see faces, so I can't yet.
Hi there. I have two questions. One is, what hair product do you use? And two,
Locks.
so wax. Okay. Cool.
No, salmon. Smoked salmon.
It's got to be
Just
vegan.
smear it around.
Yeah.
And the other question is, are you ever fearful? I mean, you know, we've just seen what's happened to Salman Rushdie. You're kind of killing sacred cows. Are you ever terrified?
Yeah. I mean, I get my fair share of threats. They're usually stupid or funny because they're just morons. The Christian ones are always the funniest because it's always, God is love and peace, so fuck you and die. But I forget who it was who said it, but sacred cows make the best burgers.
You should claim that.
Thank you. You mentioned the organisation Footsteps that supports people who are questioning ultra-orthodoxy. We've got our own version here. I happen to run it. And it's called Pathways, for anyone who doesn't know it.
Well, you stole that name. That's whatever. It's very close
That's
to
right.
Footsteps.
So you talked about Jews being questioners, questioning people. From my experience of people like yourself that have moved away, being able to ask questions from where you've come from takes even more courage. Like, it's even harder to ask those questions because you're overcoming or having to deal with all the quandary of the question, the question,
Yeah.
the shame, the question. Where do you think, this is my question, where do you think our Jewish questioning comes from? Because we are questioners.
Well, so are other people. I think people question. I think that's just in our nature. I don't know if there's anything that I could look at and go, maybe this is part of it for that particular group of people. it's that we're in exile. We're a little group who floats around from society to society. We see what's up, and we question it. The reality is if you're raised religiously, if you're raised Orthodox, Abraham is not the only one who questioned God, right? God said to Moses, lead my people out, and Moses said, piss off, right? Jeremiah said the same thing. Job questioned it. Jonah got thrown off a boat for doing it. So God doesn't respond well to those things, but there's a tradition of fighting back, right? It's just not the tradition that we're shown. But if you're of a certain mindset, if you just, I don't know what it is. I've always felt it. I felt it from about everything. There always been a question of what if they're wrong, right? And maybe it's seeing hypocrisy. Maybe, in the people that you're helping, in the people in footsteps, the hypocrisy was very obvious, right? So in my family, it was, Shabbos is a day of rest and peace, but Dad actually got drunk and beat everybody. So it's bullshit, right? Literally, Rabbi Goldfinger sat there picking his nose all day, but I'm supposed to admire him. Rabbis yell and break kids' arms, there's hate in it. So I think if you see it, and if you're Muslim and you see it, if you're Christian and you see it firsthand, and the priest is saying, God is love, now take off your pants, you go, wait a minute, this is fucked up. And you start a thought process of questioning the power, right? It says on my arm, it's a quote from Voltaire, écrasez l'infâme, crush the infamy. He was talking about the church, but I think that's true for everything, right? And maybe it is something about coming from families where the lies were obvious, that from a young age you start to go, the people in power are lying to me. They're saying one thing and doing another, and once that starts, if you're lucky, it leads to everything.
Thank you very much. I wish I could have a week with you.
Oh, gee, it's your accent. I thought you said wake, like.
No, a week.
I'm like, come to Adelaide. You're not. It's about 2 days away.
I don't know where to begin. There's so much in what you have said, just so much. But I'm wondering whether I couldn't help but wonder whether you were perhaps I don't know about confusing, but you're bringing your family, and obviously your father sounds like he was a pretty bad person. He was not a good parent to you. But if your father wasn't a good parent to you, can you extrapolate? How do you extrapolate from that the God that some people believe in, or the religion that people believe in, is wicked and malevolent and nasty?
Yeah.
Because human beings.
I don't think they can be for anybody. I think they're always one. They're intertwined, right? I've always said if I had a great childhood and a loving father, and they taught me that God was a loving God, I wouldn't be here, right? It would have been very different. But when you're told a story and you see that story being true in your real life, then that's your reality. And it's worth saying, that was my reality. I've often said, when people stand up and they say, hey, I don't like what you're saying about Judaism. Well, go give shit to the rabbi who told it to me. I'm just telling you what he told me. I was just stupid enough to believe it. But I didn't make it up. They told me that, right? That's where the issue is what are we teaching kids? I wasn't alone in that classroom. There's thousands of people told this. And so, yeah, of course, one feeds off the other. I have no issue with that. If the story that you were raised with gives you comfort in life, Geg is into hate. I don't care. Some people need gin, Some people need heroin. Life's tough. I don't begrudge anybody. Somebody asked me the other day, were you the type of guy who would like sit down at a bar and try and talk somebody out of their belief? Never. If that gets you from day one to game over, great. You're lucky. I didn't get to have that. I'm never going to have that. So I have to deal with the repercussions of the story I'm in.
Thank you very much for your talk. It's outstanding. I'd just like to ask, you've indicated a number of cogent reasons why perhaps one may not want to belong to a religion, or perhaps the adverse effects of it and the negative implications. Somehow, for whatever reason, half of the world's population, maybe 4 or 5 billion people, adhere to organised religion. If you're a Catholic, for example, clearly you're born in sin and you make up your whole life trying to make up for it. Why is it that so many people, in that case, in your opinion, I mean, there are many postulates around, are sucked into it if it's so detrimental? And do you think people really need something to believe in, and why do they adhere to that, for example?
If you find out, let me know. I have no idea. I suspect it's the old Jesuit saying, give me a boy until he's 7 and I'll give you the man. You start telling kids stories when they're 2 and 3 years old, it sticks.
I think we'll have time for 2 more questions.
Thank you.
This is a bit different, but I'm just wondering how you deal with anti-Semitism that must come your way, and especially now that you're going to Adelaide in a few days. I'm wondering seriously how, if you hear these dreadful things, how are you going to react to that?
Well, what's going on in Adelaide?
I'm not sure.
There's something going on. I don't expect anti-Semitism in Adelaide. I expect Jews getting angry at me. I grew up with, I grew up being picked on and having my yarmulke stolen off my head and all those things. I'll just to answer it briefly. I work with words for a living. Words are powerful, and we all know that. But they also have a really short shelf life. And when you start using them too often, they stop meaning anything. So I come from America, where the ADL is convinced everyone's a Nazi, and everything's anti-Semitism. And I think if you go back and pull someone out of Auschwitz and say, hey, this angry letter to the Times, does that count as Nazism to you? They'd spit in your face. And you can't keep doing that. We know it when we see it. We've had plenty of experience. When they start up, I'll know it's there. I can smell it a mile. We all have Judar, right? We can tell when genocide's coming. I get all Spider-Man tingly. But what's happening with those words is politics on both sides, on all sides. And I think that when my kids and their friends who aren't Jewish know that everybody is a Nazi, it's a joke. We've done something very wrong. You need to protect language. You need to protect these words and these concepts when you really need them. So I don't know, honestly. I didn't hear about this Adelaide shit till I got here. I don't care. It's Adelaide, people. No one knows about this place. I honestly, I don't know what you're all getting up in arms about. It's a book festival. Nobody reads in the shithole of Australia. Like, what do you...
I just read
kidding.
tomorrow's front page of the Adelaide Advertiser.
No, I was in a shop here. I'm not making this up. I was in a shop and I was trying to get an adapter and talking to the Asian woman, and she's asking me where I'm from and blah blah. And how long are you here for? I'm like, just a little bit. I'm going to Adelaide. And the young woman behind me goes, you're going to Adelaide? And I turn around and I go, yeah. Why are you going? And she goes, no. Who the fuck goes to Adelaide? I swear to God, that is not a made-up story. So everyone's, oh God, it's the Holocaust all over again. What the fuck are you talking about? It's 2 people out of 300 in a toilet of a town. I don't know. When we need to say Nazism, let's say Nazism. When we need to reference the Holocaust, let's reference it. But for fuck's sake, it's you know, if you want to be angry at somebody, be angry at Netanyahu. That guy can't order breakfast without talking about Auschwitz. I'll have the eggs and toast, which you could never have at Auschwitz. Vote for me. That guy's the problem.
I think we've got time for one more question, and a big welcome to our South Australian visitors tonight.
An observation, I noticed you've got a tattoo. You shared with us a quotation of Voltaire. Are there other elements that are tattooed on your body that have an impact on the way you think?
I have mom tattooed on my penis. But just the foreskin.
Yeah, buried in her backyard.
The first tattoo I got was when I realized I was done with that world and with my family, and I went and I got a tattoo of a ankle iron that was broken off on my ankle. And these are all just about writing. They're reminders. Groucho Marx, because he, you know, to reference your thing earlier about earnestness, Groucho took nothing seriously. He refused to. It was so awesome. He was just the Pope of unearnestness. It was great. You should, if you haven't read his letters, do yourself a favor and buy a copy of the Letters of Groucho Marx, and it's just such a great way to go through life. And then there's Funny is Enough, which is something my wife always says to me, and various other things, but those are just so I remember not to take it all too seriously.
Incidentally, I also have Groucho Marx tattooed, but you can't see it. my mother was thrilled about that.
It's not like you got Zeppo.
No, I had 3, but Zeppo did not make the cut.
I have Larry, Moe, and Curly, but I'm not going to tell you.
Do have one more question.
Oh, we've got time for one more? Great.
I'm curious, Shalom, how you feel about people who have kind of Jewish envy. Like some of us non-Jews want to marry Jews, we love Jews, we want to read Jewish writers. Have you come across that fascination or obsession as well as the anti-Semitism?
You need some fucking help, lady. If you really love being Jewish so much, come outside, I'll throw stones at you.
But Shalom, I will say, if it wasn't for all the Jews, who else is reading your books? Do you get as much fanfare out of the non-Jewish community?
Wow, that's harsh. Yes.
Okay, great.
And fuck you too. But no, honestly, look, it's. I'll be honest. Americans don't get black comedy.
Australians do.
Yeah.
Well, they think they do.
Yeah, Australians and I do very well anywhere but America, because Netflix. But you know, they like their. You know those plates you have when you're a little kid that separate your peas from your mashed potatoes? That's Americans. Like, they want to know what they're supposed to feel before they go into it.
Yeah.
So if Paul Rudd's in it, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do.
And you've got to hear that canned laughter.
Yeah.
And then you know to laugh.
Yeah.
It's like a cue.
Right.
Yeah.
And when they try and mix the two, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Excellent.
Oh,
can we do, I don't know, one more and that's it? Is everybody going to be up in arms if I do that? The only thing I will say, because I'm obliged to, is if you're not already a member of Melbourne Jewish Book Week, sign up to get the newsletters. This is our non-festival year, but we have this amazing evening anyway, because you have graced our shores. But we do have events all through the year. We have the Jewish Quarterly that I mentioned before. We have the online sessions. And we have the school program in August, but next year is our actual festival year. You'll have to come back. I'll let one more question and then that's it. But you have to
No
go out and
sushi.
buy the books to prove Shalom a liar, because we actually do read. We don't just buy the books, we read them.
I'm a bit afraid to ask it, but how do you define your Judaism?
I have irritable bowel syndrome and I go to a psychiatrist. I mean, honestly, it's like it's all I can do to not run off to the bathroom right now.
So I think you might have answered my, I'm going to take the prerogative, like this is going to be a very short, sharp final question, but one of the things that struck me in Hope, which my dog didn't love the satire on Anne Frank. I liked it very much.
German Shepherd?
Very good. My anti-Semitic dog, yeah. No, I was thinking the opposite, like Jewish Defence League dog.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things I thought was really kind of
Short-haired Israelite.
charming. One of the things that was really charming was Solomon Kugel's, like, that he was always trying to plan his last words. And so I thought it might be appropriate. Have you got your last words? Oh, and just before that, before you do that, I just want to share that when, who died last week?
Richard Belzer.
Richard Belzer's last words were like, "Fuck you, motherfucker,"
Yeah.
which Solomon Kugel plays with.
Yeah. I do, but I'm not going to tell you what they are.
Okay.
Because you'll steal them.
That's very disappointing. Well,
yeah, I remember Voltaire's joke when he was on his deathbed and they brought in a priest who he did not want to see. And he said, now that you're dying, will you renounce Satan? And Voltaire's answer was, now's not a good time to be making enemies. Which I thought was perfect.
Thank you. And please give a hand to Shalom and David for
Thank you. Thank you very much.